Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise of Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the founder and the host of the Rise of Justice Movement and the Rise of Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to sit down and talk with my new friend. We've been following each other on social media for a little while, and I'm deeply inspired as we have a lot in common and a lot to talk about in a short amount of time. So, without further ado, Noel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Zachary. I'm really happy to be spending some time with you today.
Likewise. So, beautiful Georgia, beautiful Georgia, and you do some very incredible work, and I would love for you to introduce yourself, give us a backstory on who you are and what's gotten you to the point where you are now, and then we'll kind of like dissect it and then break it up and then kind of do some more deep dives into certain aspects. How does that sound for you?
That sounds great. My name is Noël Heatherland. I feel most affirmed by they, them pronouns. I am an activist, an advocate, and a survivor, and most importantly, a human being trying to live my most authentic and joyful life here in the great state of Georgia. I currently serve as the statewide organizing manager for Georgia Equality. I also sit on the boards of a couple of transgender and immigrant focused organizations here in the Atlanta and North Georgia area. And besides that, I am fairly involved in some work for immigration liberation and also the environment, and just in general, try to operate from a lens of what I refer to as collective liberation, that none of us are free until we're all free. But life hasn't always been that way. I started out life in a home where my parents were not religious. They, came from a couple of different backgrounds, a military family background, another background where there was a lot of poverty and abuse. And they met each other and decided to start exploring Christianity. And unfortunately, went from a life of drug addiction, lack of education, and different things like that into the not so wonderful world of white Christian nationalism, specifically a cult that tries to get families to have as many kids as they can to essentially take over the world and the government for Christ. And their version of Christ is definitely what we would call white Jesus, which is basically very much about patriarchy, about condemning people, about judgment, and really ultimately what it comes down to is high control. And so I was born into that world. Essentially, it got very real around the time of second grade and pretty much was my existence until around 16, 17, 18. I say 16, 17, 18 because at that time, they somewhat started to phase out of being official members of the cult, but never really deconstructed that. So there was always that element in our household to this day. So I was raised to be involved in politics from a perspective of doing what the leadership told me to do, doing what pastors told me to do, doing what our cult leader told me to do. And so I was involved in politics through not just the IBLP, which is the Institute for Basic Life Principles, but also an organization called Teen Pact Teen Leadership School. And so I consider what I do nowadays to be very healing, not just for me, but hopefully for the larger community. And even though I was just a kid and I'm not responsible for all the things that I believed and was involved in as a young person, it is part of intentionally how I live my life now is a way of making amends not only to other people who may have been hurt, but also to my younger self.
Looking back, looking back and thinking about your younger self, is there anything that you would tell yourself now that you're older? Looking back, is there anything that you would tell your younger self?
That's such a beautiful question, Zachary.
It's a hard one, and this is liable to bring on a lot of emotions.
Yes.
Um, but I've never asked this question, and I want to ask this question because I think, like you stated, or like I stated, you and I have a lot in common. And I did not grow up in religion. I didn't grow up in anything like that. My grandmother was Lutheran, but did not force religion onto anybody. I did not go to church until I got into high school. Um, and then I discovered what conversion therapy was and put
Mm,
myself through it for 2.5 years. And it literally destroyed everything that I believed in.
yeah.
It destroyed relationships, like friendship wise, and then you kind of like struggling with it because it's like, if you tell anybody what's going on, I'll do this, X, Y, Z. And it was done by this ex-pastor that um he kind of went off the face of the earth. Like he like disappeared, right? And back in 2019, I was a part of a group that did a conversion therapy ordinance in Kansas City, and we got it passed unanimously. And thinking that the Supreme Court of the United States at any moment now can rule to overturn all that work that we did in Missouri and then also across the country at any moment, because the Supreme Court is currently debating that, barring, religious it can essentially overturn all the work that we did, um, and deem that conversion therapy is fully legal in America, right?
Yeah.
It would essentially undermine all the work that we all did, not just myself, but others as well. And it's deeply alarming to say the least. But, going back to that question, is there anything that you would tell your younger self about anything, looking back and reflecting? What would you tell your younger self?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I love the question. There's a lot of layers to the question. I think being a closeted queer kid in that environment, it was important first and foremost to protect my safety and to be able to survive. And while I would want to tell my younger self, there's nothing wrong with you. You are enough and worthy and good just as you are. I also would want to affirm their decision within that particular environment to stay closeted. But I would say to them that you won't have to do that forever. There will come a day where you get to live your life fully and unapologetically. You won't have to live in silence forever. But for me, I was always told by my family that I was the oldest, by the way. So I was the eldest child, the eldest daughter at the time. I identify as a non-binary person now, but at the time I was navigating life as the eldest daughter, and I was told that if I was honest, essentially, well, they didn't use those words, but if I came out or anyone in our family came out, they would essentially be excommunicated or expelled from having relationships with siblings, with the rest of the family. And it was very clear that it was not a safe place for me to be who I was. And if I could take that younger version of myself, little Noelle, and affirm them, hug them, tell them that one day they're going to find a more accepting way to live and that they will experience belonging and community and that they will be able to build a family where they are cherished and included. That's what I would want to do for them, I think, is paint this picture of the future that is the life that I now enjoy. And I've had to fight tooth and nail. I think that's what makes me such a strong advocate and such an outspoken, relentless activist in my life, is that I lived for, give or take, 18 years, the first 18 years of my life, in an environment where I had to seal everything away. I had to repress everything in order to be safe, in order to survive and make it here. And I think that having done that, and then the work that I've done to be who I am now and get to where I am now, where I'm in leadership positions, I'm in positions where I'm sometimes on the front lines of the movement for progress and equity, that work, it makes you a certain kind of person where you're unexplainably strong, and it makes it where you just don't give up easily, and you are willing to say and do things that other people who haven't been through similar experiences aren't willing to say and do.
I got emotional while you were talking, and you probably heard it in my voice. I'm kind of like circling back a little bit because it's like thinking about the where you were and where you are now. It's a really long journey, and it's
Mhm.
not the same for every single person, right? But there are people that just really understand it, and I feel deeply connected right now. So, um, thinking about, where you are now and the work that you do is deeply inspiring. I want to kind of dive in a little bit more to like your domestic violence, if you're
Mhm.
comfortable talking about that,
Yeah.
and kind of diving into that a little bit and talking about violence amongst LGBTQ individuals and how
Mhm.
it's at a heightened risk for LGBTQ individuals to experience violence.
Yeah.
And whenever I think about violence, I think about Sam Nordquist, from
Mhm.
Minnesota, was a trans man that was brutally murdered in New York by several
Mhm.
people. I've connected with his sister,
Mhm.
and that's going to be a deeply impactful interview whenever that time comes, whenever she's comfortable doing so. It's going to be a very deep and impactful conversation. But I think about that as somebody who used to live in Minneapolis. I moved to Minneapolis for, well, I don't remember the exact reason I moved, but I got up there and I felt a sense of community. I felt it very deeply. It's a very vibrant community, and everything that's going on right now in Minneapolis is deeply heartbreaking. Thinking about Renee Good, thinking about Alex Preddy, thinking about the ICE surge, it has been deeply alarming to step back and watch and know that I'm in Missouri and in Kansas and I can't do a damn thing. But what I can do, and well, we can do a lot. I'm just not physically there like I want to be, but we've been amplifying a lot of that on our social media and
Yeah.
collaborating with people that are on the ground and getting updates about things that are going on up there. And just kind of seeing that and hyper focus on Minneapolis specifically for a reason. Not just because it's personal to me, but just I have a lot of people up there that I'm still connected to. But let's kind of dive in a little bit, talk
Mhm.
about your survivor story, and talk more about violence against LGBTQ individuals and that
Yeah.
heightened risk.
Absolutely. So I have to acknowledge at the very beginning that when you are raised in a religious cult, a high control environment, one of the things that they teach, this is true of, I think, 98% of religion based cults, is that they teach women, they teach potential victims to stay quiet, to accept whatever treatment is done to them. And in my particular one, in the IBLP, they would actually teach that if your husband was abusive to you, that was just part of God's plan, and that in order to be in God's will and to please God, you must not just accept it, but be grateful for it. And this includes rape, it includes any type of sexual abuse or assault. And when you're indoctrinated in that, and I know that might be hard for some listeners to understand, how do people believe that? But when you're born into that, or when you're raised in that, and here's the truth too that I think people need to understand. Although my upbringing is one of the more extremes, right? Like we were actually in the cult itself, the material from this particular cult, which is the IBLP, which is also its subgroup, ATI, or the Advanced Training Institute. They had seminars and training conferences all across the country, all across the United States, in more mainstream churches. So chances are, for listeners who grew up or spent any time attending religious institutions in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and even to the present day, the chances are that the material from my particular cult, there's a high chance it reached you. If you've ever seen the umbrella diagram, which every once in a while goes around on social media platforms, which shows a series of umbrellas stacked on top of each other, God, the husband, the wife, the children, these little, umbrellas, each one smaller than the one before it. It's showing you the authority, and that the male figure in the household is closer to God than the mother, and then the children. And so you lose your sense of autonomy. In fact, I never really had a sense of autonomy until I got out and actually spent a lot of money on therapy. I had no idea what autonomy was, not only as a word, but as a concept, right? And so when you're set up to believe that people are allowed to do whatever, and also as a queer person who is longing for affection, who is desperate to find a place that feels like home because you've never had it, it really sets you up to go into abusive situations. It really fosters this high risk mentality to end up exposed to abusive figures and abusive partners, which I really feel that is highly responsible for the journey that I've been on with relationships in my life. And so after leaving the cult, I did get married, and the first marriage was to, a cisgender heterosexual man. I was fresh out of the cult, still didn't really fully grasp my queerness or understand that I had the autonomy to live as a queer person. And so I married him, and we, were together for a while, but I'm very queer. I'm very gay. And so that was not going to last. That was not going to work out long term. And eventually we find ourselves, on this journey of, I go my way, he goes his way, and I begin to live more in the LGBTQ plus world and find my footing and get to be myself, which is great. And I end up meeting someone who is a person in the community. They identified as a lesbian when we first met and did transition while we were together. And so at the end of our relationship, they were a transgender man. But during that time, we were together and ended up getting married. It was a lot of domestic violence. It was domestic abuse, and I didn't feel comfortable talking about it and being honest about it. I think for a couple of different reasons. Number one, when you haven't had proper education about what abuse is, about what violence is, when you've been sheltered from that, it's hard to know exactly confidently when it's happening to you. And then secondly, it's difficult when you are attempting to finally be a queer person in community, and even at that time becoming more and more of an advocate for the queer community. I was very scared, to be honest, about what I was experiencing at home because I was afraid of how it would hurt the cause of trans liberation, of how it would impact my relationships with other trans and queer people. I was afraid of not being believed. I was afraid of losing standing and connection in the community. I was very worried also about my partner at the time, even though they were the one, inflicting domestic violence onto me. I was also concerned about them and what reporting this and sharing this information with people, how it would impact them. And so it was a really confusing and lonely time. I felt very isolated. And, in the aftermath, some of my fears about coming out with what I was experiencing about living through domestic violence in this relationship, some of those fears were in fact valid and founded because I did experience, some questioning and some judgment, but I also was able to get freedom and get safe. And I'm living a much more happy, safe, quiet, well, sometimes quiet, mainly just joyful life today. And so it was worth the pain and the aftermath in order to do what I needed to do to get here. But, you know, as a person in the relationship who was a queer person, you're correct in stating that queer people do face increased violence. Often it is from, cishet people. Often it is, bisexual people in relationships with cishet men, or often it is transgender people who, get exposed to violence from a variety of different identities and their partners. And that definitely happens. For me, I think that I always want to make sure to center LGBTQ plus survivors because it is something that I think we still are hesitant to speak about because we know we are still fighting for our overall human rights. And so it is very layered and challenging to be honest and speak up about the times when there's violence inside our own community.
You said a key thing about violence within the own, like within our own community, because it does absolutely exist. And oh gosh, it's terrible. Um, first of all, thank you for, speaking so candidly and also like telling, your truth, which I absolutely love that. And I think about all everybody who's came before us. So thinking about like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, and thinking about like Harvey Milk, and thinking about all of these monumental figures that have led the movement forward, right? And while we recognize we've come a long way, there's still a lot more further to go. But it's not only just about the LGBTQ plus community too. It's also about the immigrant communities. It's
Mm-hmm.
also about disabled communities. It's also, and a lot of those identities intersect. So thinking about intersectionality and thinking about everything that's happening in the world right now, because the world is quite literally on fire in a lot of different ways. What gives you hope? Like, what continues driving you forward? What continues to be that moment that says we got to keep going? What continues to give you that ambition to keep moving forward?
That is another lovely question. I really like your question, Zachary. So
I'm getting really good at this.
you're such a pro. You're excellent at this. I will go back to an earlier answer when we were
Mhm.
talking about the younger version of me. And I actually spoke at a Pride to the Capitol rally that we had here in Atlanta last week outside the Georgia State Capitol. And I read a letter that I wrote to my younger self to the crowd and told them at the end that I hoped every person who was there, every person who is an advocate, every person who shows up to speak out, that they can tap into either the younger version of themselves or to the queer youth that are out in our community today who really need us to show up. And so that is my why, my inspiration. What keeps me going is thinking about that journey for my younger self and how proud I am of where we've been able to get to, but also thinking about our LGBTQ plus young people. I had the privilege of teaching a couple of workshops last year for Brave Trails here in Georgia. Brave Trails is a queer youth camp program to allow LGBTQ plus young people to get outside and have a summer camp experience. And just being able to watch them, talk to them, interact with them, help them draw art, help them make signs, help them talk about what's important to them, hearing them give speeches about the causes they care about, which ranged in topics from things like accepting immigrants, loving your neighbors, gender affirming care, suicide prevention, all these things that are so important to them. And even with the world being on fire, even with all of the just horrible attacks on our community, from folks in Kansas losing their driver's license to, here in Georgia, they're currently trying to pass legislation to take away gender affirming care for certain folks in our community here, trying to look at things like banning puberty blockers for our youth, which we know is a gold standard of care, a best practice care that can happen, with doctors' input and parents' guidance. And it's a decision that should be kept within families and for people to make about their own bodies with informed medical consent and informed medical expertise. And yet, here we are. But when I think about those young people still finding joy in each other and building community and saying, I am still going to stand up and share my voice, that makes me so incredibly happy. It brings a smile to my face and warmth to my heart. And I would also be remiss to not mention my beautiful fiance. She is an incredible person, first and foremost. And I proposed to her a few months ago, and thankfully she said yes. But I think everyone needs someone in their life that brings them unabashed joy, like just a wild amount of joy. And that's definitely what she does for me. She is a full-time artist, an amazing painter. She does so many different artistic modalities, and she is a Black and Indigenous trans woman. She also identifies as Two-Spirit. And to get to see her live her life every day through the lens of an artist, the way that she embraces her African and Indigenous roots and uses that to propel her forward is such an inspiration to me. And I'm continually learning alongside her. But community is everything. And obviously, it's not just who our partners are, but I think that we all need at least one person, but hopefully several people, whether it's a partner, whether it's friends, whether it's comrades in the fight, that bring us wild amounts of joy. So I would, yeah, definitely be remiss to not bring her up and give her some celebration, give her some flowers for how she keeps me going in these times.
I love that because queer joy is exactly that. It's joy. And it's that bright side of a sunny day. right? And thinking about those that have not had that experience, I think it is important to share our experiences because, as I stated, my partner is a trans woman. We're a Tinder dating app success story. I never had a lot of luck with the dating apps. Never had any luck with that. I've always been kind of like stayed to myself. It's like, oh, I'm not gonna go out to the bar. I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna do that. I did a lot of like bar scene stuff when I was in Minneapolis, and I got around the wrong people, and I
Mm,
had one of my drinks spiked, and I haven't went back ever since. Not saying that that's going to happen every single time, but that trauma just
yeah.
really continues to exist in the back of your mind, and you just think about that. And you're like, do I really need to go out and drink, or can I just go to the store and just grab like a thing of wine? I don't drink wine, but that was just a horrible example. Um, but just thinking about that, but anyway, so thinking about, there's some elections happening in Georgia,
Yes.
and there's some incredible candidates that are running. So thinking about that, what are you seeing kind of like on social media whenever people talk about Georgia? What are you seeing? Like if you're out in the community, just give like that overview of what you see in Georgia and
Yes.
either politics or just in general, because there's a lot of rich history. Now, before you answer that, there's a statue that's in Atlanta that's of Rosa Parks. It's called Continue the Conversation. I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen a lot of pictures about it. I've had friends that have lived in Atlanta and down in Georgia. And, my co-founder, like I said, my co-founder's parents live down in Georgia. Um, but there's that statue, and it sticks in the back of my mind because I always think like, what would Rosa Parks do? What would she
I love that.
say? What would she do? Because she was that monumental. But even before her, there was so many that came before Rosa. But Rosa's was a pivotal moment in like Black liberation and like history. And I'll be doing a whole series on like Black liberation with one of my friends that I've come very fond of and have gotten really close to. But we'll be doing a whole series on like Black liberation, about civil rights movement, etc. Rest in power, Jesse Jackson. That one kind of hit me really hard. I did a whole research project on him in high school, so that one hit me really hard. But kind of give that overview of what Georgia looks like to you. And this is a very loaded question. It can go in a lot of ways, but I'm intrigued to hear about how you see Georgia.
I love to talk about Georgia. I was born and raised here. Even though I had a very unusual upbringing, I have so much love for Georgia. I grew up in rural South Georgia and went to the University of Georgia, graduated from there, and have lived here my whole life, other than a couple of years. I worked up in Washington, D.C. So Georgia holds a very special place in my heart. And I'm glad you asked this question because so many people, especially liberals and sometimes even leftists up in the north or, certain parts of the country that are more blue, if you will often say very negative comments about the South, about how backwards we are, about we don't deserve our rights, some, horrendous comments because we've had more struggles here. But to your point, Georgia is the birthplace. I will go ahead and say I believe Georgia is one of the birthplaces of the civil rights movement. It is so critical to the history of civil rights advancement in our country as a whole. And so I think that when people who claim more progressive politics say really nasty things about the South, they're forgetting about the queer people here. And they also, whether they mean to or not, I would even pitch that it's a racist statement because Black people and Brown people have done immense amounts of work over the years from right here in the state of Georgia to help us get to the place where we are now and to continue the ongoing work. And I like to say that when Black trans women are free, we will all be free. So, centering Black liberation is of the utmost importance anytime we are talking about work that we are doing in progressive spaces. So I love to hear about your upcoming episodes on Black liberation. I look forward to listening to that. Here in Georgia, we do have some exciting things happening, and I have to preface this part of the conversation due to the work that I do full time, that this is me, Noël Heatherland, the independent activist and advocate, commenting on this section, but I will definitely give you some of my thoughts on things that are happening. I love that we have had several transgender and gender expansive folks running for races here in Georgia this year. So I'm going to make it a little bit more state level in my commentary. So one of the races I would like to uplift on this episode is Bentley Hudgens. They are a non-binary person and they are running for House seat for House District 90, which is parts of DeKalb, Decatur, Georgia area, one of the suburbs of Atlanta. They are an Asian person. They are an organizer. They have been doing this work for liberation, for queer people, anti-racism work, all these things for probably a decade or more. And they are from Middle Georgia, from Macon area, came up to Atlanta, and they worked for the Human Rights Campaign here at the state level, currently on a leave to run their campaign. But super excited to see their race happening. The election is on May 19th. So, depending on when this episode goes live, we may or may not know that they are advancing, but I am definitely manifesting a win for them. We deserve to have transgender and non binary people representing us. Everyone deserves to get to see people who represent their identities in our state capital, in the national capital. So I'm really thrilled to see this. I believe that if they are to win, they would be the first non binary or trans person that is out. To serve in the Georgia legislature. So, a lot of us are very excited and eagerly supporting their campaign. I'll also mention that we have Aaron Baker, who is running for a House seat out of the Sandy Springs, Georgia area, another suburb of Atlanta. She is a transgender woman and has been pretty well known in the local community as an activist and advocate for a while, very familiar with the political process, has a pretty robust social media following, and is just a lovely human. She's married to a pastor of a very affirming and inclusive church here in the Atlanta area. So those are a couple of races that I am watching and doing what I can to be supportive on a personal level. And then also we have a governor's race that is about to happen, and there are a lot of people who have thrown their hat in the ring. I will mention, if you're not familiar, we do, unfortunately, showing as one of the current leading contenders in this race is a man by the name of Jeff Duncan, who was formerly a Republican, formerly an associate of Trump's. He spoke at the Democratic National Convention last year instead of Rua Roman, who is one of our House representatives and also a Palestinian woman. And the DNC chose to not have her on the stage, but they did give a spot to Jeff Duncan. He is now running for governor. So our leading, one of our current leading contestants for the Georgia governorship is unfortunately someone who was most recently a Republican. So I have a lot of feelings about that, and we probably don't have enough time left in the conversation for me to cover my feelings about that. Rua Roman, who is an incredible Palestinian woman and a person who shows up, speaks out, deeply cares about human rights and the advancement of progress and equity in our state. She was running for governor due to the amount of money that certain candidates are receiving or have received, and other issues. She did decide to pivot and is now running for a state Senate seat instead. Very excited to see what she's doing. And even folks who don't live in Georgia, I think she is an excellent person to find out about, learn about, and consider supporting her journey and what she's doing, because she's one of the ones really doing the work. But yeah, it's interesting. I would definitely like to see liberal Georgians, especially white liberal Georgians, really think about who they're supporting for the governor's race, and to take Black and brown and female candidates more seriously. This kind of gives me some reflections back to, Kamala Harris's campaign, right? That, there were people who said she was unelectable because she was a Black woman, right? And maybe you think she's unelectable, then what does that do to her electability? And when we really, again, peel that back, I think what we're going to find there is racism and misogyny. So I have high hopes for what we're going to see in this race, but definitely need for liberals and even some leftists to do more anti-racism work and more work on understanding how misogyny shows up in the way we engage with political races.
I'm really glad that you mentioned Arua. That is somebody that I look up to, even being here in Kansas. The Palestinian liberation is obviously a key thing for me and deeply important to me. I absolutely love the energy that Rua brings to everything. I was saddened to hear, about dropping from the governor to the Senate, but also at the same time, she's going to be a badass in everything that she does. So that's somebody that I look up to very deeply. And I also just interviewed Bree Woodson, who's running for Congress in Georgia as well. Had a very deep conversation with her and deeply enjoyed that conversation. She's a badass human being. She's running for Congress in the 12th district of Georgia. Incredible human being. Very focused on mental health and drug addiction, and she's a beautiful human being too. She's also known as AKA the controversial blonde on social media. But yeah, I'm so excited. Just watching the energy across the country, I think it's been very eye-opening, and I think that's my reason why that I continue moving forward is seeing people rising up and fighting for liberation in all marginalized communities has been an eye-opening moment, and it shows how much further we still have to go. But I remain hopeful, and it's people like you, it's people like Rua, it's people like Bree, it's people, here in Kansas, like Cindy Holscher, who's running for Kansas governor. One of my friends is a trans woman that is newly elected to Kansas legislative, Abby Boatman. I think it's just these beautiful human beings are just really just coming together to fight for freedom and equality and bringing everybody together. And I think a lot of that comes from my grandfather, being an Air Force veteran, but also being involved in union work. And then my grandmother just teaching me how to love people and showing me that a better tomorrow is absolutely possible. So with that, is there anything else that you wanted to mention, and how can people also um, find you on social media and uplift the work that you are doing?
Thanks for asking that. And thank you for shining a light on what's going on in the South. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast as someone who is a LGBTQ plus person, as a survivor, and as someone doing organizing work in the South. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to have a voice on your platform. I would love for anyone who would like to follow me. You can find me on Instagram as Noël for Collective Liberation. Again, that's Noël, the number 4, Collective Liberation. I'm on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, but the most active over on Instagram. And I would love to share, while I have the floor on a podcast, that I really respect the work that you're doing. So I know you have some amazing listeners. I would really like to take the opportunity to uplift an immigrant here in Georgia that is currently facing deportation, and to ask listeners to please support his wife and his children by doing a couple of things if they're able. So, Rodney Taylor's wife, Mildred, has become a personal friend of me and my partner over the past year or so. And I have really been deeply touched to get to know him through his family, even be able to have a phone call briefly with him at one point, possibly a visit soon, God willing. But he is a man that is originally from Liberia, but he came here when he was 2 years old for medical care. He's disabled. He's a double amputee. He cannot really get around without prosthetics. He can't really even use a wheelchair because he's also missing fingers on his hands. And so he's very reliant on high quality medical care to have quality of life. And unfortunately, he's been in Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia for over a year. And he recently was issued travel papers to Liberia, which generally is a serious sign that things may be escalating. And his care while in Stewart, obviously anyone in detention is facing really poor conditions, but for him, with his healthcare needs and his disabilities, it's been egregious beyond what I could even convey in the short time we have left. But his wife has asked if everyone can please go to change.org. There's a petition. It's titled Demand the Release of Rodney Taylor from ICE Detention. And please sign that. And also, please go to their Instagram, which is Free Rodney Taylor. And there will be information there, as well as on my personal Instagram, with updates, with ways to give to the family's GoFundMe. And I know times are tough, so if people can't give, even sharing that would be a huge help. Right now, he's obviously very discouraged. And so they've been trying to have more phone calls to keep his spirits up and try to ensure that we all out here stay aware of step by step what's happening. But all of those phone calls cost a lot of money. So giving money to the GoFundMe helps ensure they have that to put on the books for his commissary cost. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about him. It's very near and dear to my heart. And I am just praying. My relationship to God is very unique these days after all the religious trauma I've been through, but I am definitely praying for him and his family in my own way, and just wanting to take any opportunity I can to uplift him and their calls to action, reaching out to Congress people as well, especially if you're located in Georgia, but even not, just amplifying his story to people can be a huge help. And we've got phone numbers that you can contact as well, posted on the social media campaigns.
Thank you so much for highlighting about Rodney Taylor. I have been following this, and I saw that Congresswoman Lucy McBath also uplifted about Rodney Taylor in Congress. I did see that, and I've been following this for a little bit. So first of all, thank you for bringing this to everybody's attention, and please send my love to that family because this is deeply alarming. As a disabled person myself, and my mother is also disabled, I cannot imagine what this would be like also being away from your family. So thank you so much for uplifting Rodney, and we're going to do a call to action and bring this more to light. We have this platform that we built from the ground up that I want to utilize and bring attention to things that are happening. So this is obviously, I just wrote down, and anybody who's listening, please follow Free Rodney Taylor on social media. And as Noel mentioned, there is a petition which I also just signed. We will also add it to our bio and to our story. Whenever this episode goes live, we'll be sure to include that in the description as well. And please send my love to Rodney if you get to meet him, and then also to the family. And they can collaborate with us on anything that they have, like calls to action. Feel free to let them know that as well. And to anybody out there who is listening, please make sure that you are watching what is happening across the country as communities are being terrorized and destroyed, for lack of a better term. Please continue to uplift these stories and continue being the voices of change, because together, liberation will continue thriving, will continue going. And revolutions do not happen overnight. They build up over time, and the revolution will not be televised. So, with that being said, Noel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Please take care of yourself, my friend, and I welcome you back anytime you have anything you'd like to share. Please keep in touch. Continue to uplift the work that we are doing, and vice versa. And you have me in your corner, and I'm watching the South very, very closely.
Thank you so much, Zachary. And like you said, together, liberation is possible.
Absolutely. Please take care of yourself, my friend. I will talk to you very soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.